Hey guys, and welcome back. I'm back now after the holiday season. Sorry for the break in videos. But now here I am, back with something pretty interesting. So, I am currently working on this non-metallic Marneus Calgars. Now, I'm pretty happy with where it is so far. I did the arm just to test the blues. I did the leg for an Instagram step-by-step. But the rest of this, I'm going to be painting in this video, if my phone can store enough. And I'll be most likely using the helmeted head as well, but I will be painting up the face separately just because they're unattached at the moment. I can swap and choose. So the main focus of today's video is the non-metallic blue I've been doing here. Now, I have done a base for this guy. It's very popular, people really like it, and I will be doing a tutorial on how I made this base later on in the future. I just need to get hold of another one of these plinths and probably another Calgars model. But this will be coming and it'll be really cool. There's a lot of really nice techniques and stuff. It's very simple, easy to understand, but you get a really nice effect out of it. So back to the focus of today, Calgars. Now, as you can see, we've got quite a rich blue I'm going for. I'm really happy with how it's turned out so far. So the colours I've used is I've base coated Cantor blue, so you can see on the unpainted parts, that's that colour. And then I use Teclis blue, then up to Lawthorn blue, and finally, in only some very select areas, and some white. It doesn't matter which white you use, I just use this one. I do use black in some areas and mix it with Cantor to recess shade, but I'll get to that bit later. So those are the paints we're using. This is the model we'll be painting, and I think I'm going to start with the chest now, just because it's the center of the model, and from there I can work up to the arms and the legs and then eventually the backpack. Right, so the first step is Teclis blue. What I've got here in my palette is I've got some very thin Teclis and some 50-50 mix. So this is 50-50 with water. This is about 1 part Teclis to 2 parts water. And I'm going to start with the 50-50 just to sketch in the highlights and where we want to place them, just to give ourselves an idea. So of course, I'm going to start with the center here, the mid area. You can sort of see how the light's playing currently on it, so I'm going to just rough in some of these. Might actually be a bit too thin. I'm not being worried about transitions and whatnot at the moment. I am just painting where the light's going to go. Now, like I said, it's a bit too thin. What I'm going to do is take some Teclis and I'm going to thin it down even less. So this is probably 2 parts Teclis to 1 part water. Now this is, as I said, just to have a more defined sketch, because we're not a blending transition stage yet. We are just trying to figure out where the light fits. So I'm currently working on the primary highlight. So this is the main shine, the main piece that's going to be catching the light. Then have a little bit more over here. Again, you can just sort of play around with where you figure it looks best in regards. Now, it's kind of hard to there's a lot of intricacy in this area, so probably going to be flipping around Calgars a little bit. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get probably the tops of the rim of his collar here. just here. I'm going to leave more shadow over this way. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, because we're only doing the first layer of highlights here, so it doesn't matter if we sort of place that in. Now, there's two different highlights I'm thinking of, the primary and the secondary. So for example, on the leg here, this one down the very front is the primary, whereas this one down the side here is the secondary. And it helps give that sort of reflective look. So I'm just working on the primary at the moment. And a look, actually I'm working on both, just thinking about it. So a few ones here will be secondary, there'll be a few primaries as well. What I'm going to also do is hit the back of the sort of hood here. Just because. Now this little detail here is going to be gold, so I don't need to touch that. I believe the top here is going to be blue as well. Now secondary highlights. I'm gonna hit just here, leave a little bit of the eagle. See, these are just little touches, little areas that might catch a little bit of light, usually at the edges. See, like I'm doing the underside here. Now these areas, the secondary highlights, will probably only ever go up to Techless Blue. We're just putting them in here now, just to again tell ourselves where we're putting the light. I'm also going to hit the edge of the collar here. Probably going to go for a wide, a little bit just back here as well. For this side, I'm just going to hit here, leave a little gap between the center of the collar and the highlight area. So there you go. I'm going to try and bring at least the center of these areas up to a full techless blue. So if there's any a bit of thin looking areas, just bring those up a little bit. You can get a rough inclination of how the light's going to play here. Obviously it's not final, the blends and the transitions and the secondary highlights to go on the... It's kind of confusing actually when I say that. What I meant to say there was, once we bring in the Luthern blue, or however you say it, to the primary highlights, so this front, the very front areas, the tops, that's when we'll start seeing more of the light pattern come in. But at the moment, this is the first stage. So next up we need to blend this in with the Cantor blue, and I'll show you how I go about doing that. Hey, and welcome back. Now I'm going to start blending these highlights we've just put down, but the way I'm going to do it is back and forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of join the two areas using a 50-50 mix of Teclis and Cantor. Now with this I'm going to glaze over pretty much everything, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to work the shadows back in with the Cantor, with the glaze of Cantor, and then bring the highlights back up with a glaze of Teclis. So sort of bringing them together and then separating them again. I don't know why, but for me it helps me sort of work better. It helps me figure out the blending and the transitions a lot easier. So I'm just taking my glaze here. It's very thin. It's not anything mad. I'm not just covering over everything. I'm just sort of bringing it all together. So I can figure out how to match it all when I do blend. One of the useful things about working with thin glazes is they dry particularly quickly, especially if you are coating them in thin layers. So you can sort of, by the time you've finished going around a section, where you started is usually dry again. So I'm going to do this a couple more times. So you can still see where the transitions are going to go on whatnot, but it just makes, at least for me, it makes it a lot simpler to bring it down a tone, add the shadows, and then bring it back up to Teclis. quickly add that little Techless highlight there. Right. I'm going to dry this with a hairdryer and then show you what's next. Now that is dry, we can work on the next part. Now this is there's a lot of things being covered up here on the chest piece, so it's not the easiest, most obvious to show this sort of technique on. The arm here and the leg are a lot more obvious, and I'll be doing those after the chest. But what I'm doing here is I've got a glaze of Cantor, very thin down, 1:1, maybe a bit more water than Cantor, depending on your taste. What I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start just bringing the shadows in, so drawing my brush from the edge of the highlight towards the center of the shadow, maybe going a little bit over, but then I let it dry. So I'm going to go around, do this with all of the highlights and areas I've done. So I want to bring the shadows down to almost full Cantor, because we did brighten them up a little bit with that Techless glaze, the 50/50 glaze. So I'm going to just repeat the process, and this is a huge part of glazing. It is just doing this over and over again. Making sure the paint isn't separating on my palette, so every so often giving it a little mix. Very thin layers, very easy to control. The back of the hood isn't that important. It is probably not going to be seen once the head's in there, but I feel like good practice to do it anyway. Right, now time to glaze back in the Techless. So now we've got these two areas roughly, the shadows roughly glazed in. What we're going to do is we're going to come back with some Techless blue, and this is another glaze. So for this one I think it's 1:1, a little bit more than 1:1 water and Techless. And we're going to glaze back up into the light areas. Now, I'm happy with that. There's still a fair amount of blending and smoothing to go, but we can do that in the later stages. So what I'm going to do is wait for this to dry, and then we'll start with the next highlight. Right, so this next stage, I've got the Lawton Blue. I've got 2 mixes of it. I've got the sort of 2 parts paint, 1 part water, and the 1.5 parts paint to 1 part water, sort of. So this is my glaze. This is going to be my thicker mix for blocking out the highlights. So I'll show you again. It's a similar process to the last layer we did. So I'm going to take my less watered down mix, and I'm going to start just blocking in here. A little bit too much paint on the brush there. And start blocking in, highlights. Oh, first I'm going to only hit the primaries, the ones that will catch the most light. I'm not worrying about being neat. Now what I will do is, once I've actually, in fact I'll just finish picking up the primary highlights. I don't know if that was on camera, sorry. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit to the secondary highlights. So areas like this. And you'll see why in a minute. So I'm just going to do another pass. Still need to hit this area here. A little bit too much on the brush there. So you can start to see the reflections and how they're going to grow. Now what we're going to do is we're going to glaze over these highlights we've just placed with Techless Blue. And that's going to do, it's going to widen some of the primary highlights and hopefully blend it together a little bit more so that when we do the actual transitions with the Lawton Blue, we'll get a nice smooth blend on there. So I've got my glaze of Techless, and as I said, glaze towards the center of the Lawton. Now this, we want to keep this fairly neat. We don't want to go over everything here, so keep the shadows out of play here. We can strengthen them up, build them up again if you do go over them, but this, we're just trying to saturate the Lawton Blue, a bit of the Techless, and this will create a smoother transition when we do bring in the older Lawton for the full transition up. A lot of these areas are quite rough on the edges and such here, but we will come in and neaten those up later on, so don't worry about that. You can see it really immediately sort of brings it from a pale blue to a rich Techless, but you can still see the transition underneath, or the block out underneath. So now I'm going to do another pass with the Techless, and then I think we'll be ready to blend in some actual Lawton highlights. Right, next stage. So now we are actually adding the proper Lawton Blue highlights. So I'm using my thin down glaze mix for this, and just gonna make sure I got enough paint on the brush. And as per usual, it's just a case of dragging the paint towards the center, and repeat. Now I'm going to do this all over on the primary highlights first. let that dry, and then I'm going to do another pass. And there we are. The next stage, we've still got a couple stages left, is recess shading. Now, how I made this is 50-50 Cantor on Abaddon Black, and then only slightly thinned, sort of almost like a layer consistency. So it's a very, very deep blue, but now we just go in and we recess shade. I'm picking out all the shaded areas, like this. Just being really careful. As neat as I can be. I'm also going to grab these little vents here as well. So this is a fairly simple process. There's not really much going on here. So we're doing it at this stage because next we will be edge highlighting. So it's easy to get this done now, just in case we do make any mistakes. We can fairly simply come back and fix them. It's going to be a bit more awkward once we've done the edge highlights to fix. So this stage really is as simple as it sounds. It is just recess shading. Making sure as well the connections to other pieces of the armour. For example, I'm going to recess shade this Omega symbol here, the Ultramarine chapter symbol. This separation really helps boost the contrast of any of the blends and painting near it. It also gives us a nice separation for when we do come back and paint these pieces. Know exactly the border to paint up to. I think I'll finish the rest off camera just because you can kind of understand what's going on here. Ayo, recess shading is done. Now moving on to edge highlighting. Now first off, I'm going to start with Techless Blue. This is going to be just thin to how I'd paint a base coat or something. It's not very thin at all. And I'm going to edge highlight all the appropriate areas. So what I mean by appropriate is not worrying about the Lawton blue highlight. I'm just going to edge highlight around basically all the armor plates. Now the reason I'm not worrying about, for example, I've built this up to Lawton blue. I'm not worrying about that because after this we're going to come in and edge highlight with the Lothern blue focused on those areas. So that's the first edge highlight. It's subtle, but it's enough. Next up is the Lothern blue highlight. Again, same consistency, the kind you usually edge highlight on, but this time we're going to be edge highlighting mostly the same areas, but we're going to be focusing more towards where we've blended in the Lothern blue. So for example, on this edge highlight here, I went all the way down to the side, whereas now I'm only going to pull it out halfway into the shadow. Then I'm going to leave it. So I'm only going to go a little bit in to where the most of the how would you say, contrast is, and then pull it back. So we're almost on the home stretch now. The last little bits will be coming up soon. let's have a look at it from further away. Now, there's one thing immediately that I can notice, and this leads us into one of our last steps. It is not as bright as the rest of the pieces. So this is the center of the model, and you can see all the brightness is leading into it. So we need to make this just as bright. Right, so the next stage on this guy, white. Now, you can use any white. I just like this one because I'm very comfortable with using it. What I've done is I've done a 1-to-1 mix of this white and water. So it's very thin, but because it's white and because of the nature of the paint, it's gonna still come on quite heavy, or at least dry, in a fashion that is very obvious. So what I'm going to do here is really push the center area, the highlights here. So I'm just going to pull it onto this here. So similar as the stuff we've done before, but obviously bring it in, make it thinner, really focus it towards the center of the highlight. I've got a little bit too much paint on there, so I'm just going to wipe it off with my thumb, come back and draw some more out. Now we can build this up with a few glazes of it, but ideally at the moment we're just keeping it simple. I'm not going to hit all the highlights of this, just the very tips, the very lightest areas. This is the center mass. This is where all the light is going to be aiming. I'm trying to, for example, the top of the toe here isn't nearly as bright as the top of the knee here. So that's my point, to bring focus upwards and into the center of the model. So just as I said before, we're going to do a couple of passes. Being neat, but we're not being overly neat, because we're going to glaze this black back down with some Lawton blue to help bring it a bit more to reality. You can start to see the shine coming in. Potentially we may actually bring this up to not full white, but a thinned white that we see now, but for the first stage I'm going to glaze back over with Lawton blue, just because that is the process we've been using so far. The only difference being that at the very start it was a 50-50 mix of Cantor and Lawton and Teclis. So got my glaze of Lawton, and then, as I said, just going to glaze over the white. Now you can immediately see it start to affect the colour. Almost immediately adds that light blue hue, which is what we're looking for. As I said before, one of the easiest things here is bringing that highlight back in. It takes no effort, no time. We need to actually add a little bit more paint to the glaze. I need to come in and recess shade this little belt buckle in a minute. There's a couple of areas I might need to recess shade, but that's just the nature of painting. Now, gonna let this dry. I'm gonna look at it from a distance in the meantime. It's looking good, it's maintaining that shine and that tone we're looking for. I will indeed push that highlight a little bit further so we have a clear transition going on, some clear definition between the lighter and the darker areas, so we can really see and start to create that focus point on the center of the model, the center mass. So, as you've seen me done before, I'm going to come back in with a white, and only on the very, very sharpest areas this time. Right. So right here in the middle of the chest, the abdomen even. That plate I'm going to hit. Then I'm going to hit just on these little collar piece. Top here as well. Yeah, top edge of that. I think the abdomen needs a little bit more. Now one thing I can do, which I might very carefully and very selectively do, is edge highlight a little bit of white. I've done it very slightly here on the shin, very, very, very softly here in the arm. And I think I'm going to do the same here. So I'm going to take my white, I'm barely going to thin it at all. So sort of base coat or layer consistency here. And I'm going to be very, very specific with where I place this. So, for example, here on the abdomen, what I'm going to do is, like it's barely there at all, just going to add that in there. Now I've gone a little bit over here, but I can glaze that away. Now I'm going to do the similar little edge highlight on the tops of the collar here. Again, I barely want to make a mark. Just want to imply that shine, just spreading across the collar. There we go, we've got a nice shine going on there. In hindsight, actually, I think I might move this reflection over here, just to have it more center facing. But I will leave that until I've done the rest, just so I know for sure if that is what I want to do. Now, what I said about earlier, this highlight here, this edge, I've sort of went a bit too far on it, so bring out the Lawton blue, just blend it back away. Like it was never there. And there's a few more areas I'm going to come back in recess shade, just because I've spilled over a little bit. Just take the same mix of recess shade as I did before, and just come in and clean up those areas. Boom. Got ourselves a chest piece. I'm pretty happy with that. Don't know about you guys. I mean, there's a lot of space missing, but we've, a lot of space missing because of the ropes, the aquila, the belt buckle, and the just a very few big surfaces to show the blending and the transitions on. But I think we've done a good job. Definitely a good focus point. Once the head's in, you won't see that back panel, and the trim on top is going to be gold anyway. So I think next up, I am going to work on the leg or the arm. It may be in the same video, it may not. It depends how long this has taken me to film, just for this chest piece. But it'll be the same methods and techniques that I've done before, just on different surfaces. I may even speed it up and just speed paint these last two limbs and come back to the backpack, just because it's going to be the same styles and techniques that I've shown throughout this video, but just on different looking areas. I'll see. So thanks for watching this, and it'll either continue or stop. Right, so on to the next part. I'm going to start with this leg here. And there's going to be quite a few different lighting areas. So originally I'm going to do this whole front section, but I also need to light the back here. So I'm going to have the main highlights on this area as well, a little bit here. I'll just show you through the process as I'm going. So these are the first highlight placements or sketches on the leg here. I've decided these are going to be the strongest, or the primary ones. The stuff down the side of the leg is only going to be secondary, so sort of like these little ones we've added here on the bottom and the sides of the legs. So next is to blend that all together. Right, so that's blended in. Now to move on to the Lothern blue stage. Right, time to blend this in, same way as we did with the chest. I'm leaving the knee pad alone because I'm going to paint that white and sort of blend that in like it's painted on the box. So I've done that now. Next stage is the recess shading and then edge highlighting. So in between filming, I've just done the knee pad so we know how that's going to be. The next stage is the white highlights and then glazing over them with Lothan blue and then bringing up sort of the top of the thigh, maybe the top of the feet here as well to add the extra shine to the primary highlights. And finally, we are done. Still need a bit of refining on the kneecap. For the most part, we are finished here. It's a little hard to see some areas, but once everything else is complete around it, it should really start coming together. Next up is the hand here. Hey, and so we're moving on to the arm now. Once again, I'll be fast forwarding through the more boring parts of the process, but showing you the steps once I've finished them. And these are all the same steps as before that we went through with on the chest piece, and just on a different surface this time. So yeah, enjoy. So I've just lined out the basic primary and secondary highlights and where I want to put them. You can see it follows quite a similar pattern with the other fist, and I'll be doing a similar kind of style with the whole bright and then not so bright kind of aspect of it. I've also come around and I've done the back of it as well. So next step is blending this in. Right, that is roughly blended in. I didn't completely blend it just because the next stage helps blend in those lower layers as well. So moving on to that now, I'm going to block out the primary highlights with Northern Blue. Right, I've blocked in the highlights and now I'm going to blend them in by, as we saw before, glazing with Techless and then bringing it back up to a softer blended Northern Blue. Right, so I've blended up the Lawthorn Blue, and next we need to recess shade using the same 50/50 Cantor and Abaddon Black mix, and then I'll move on to edge highlighting, which is Teclis Blue and then Lawthorn Blue towards the primary highlights. Right, that is the edge highlights and recess shades done. Next up is the white block out on the very primary highlights. Now, we've been through this before, it's just very thin white. Put it on the highest highlights and then you glaze over with Lawthorn Blue, and it gives this much brighter reflection, which I'm going to aim for. So, time to move on to that. Hey, how's it going? So, I think my video cut out then at some point. I'm not really sure, I was busy painting. And so I'm not sure where it finished off, but I finished the arm now. So I've got that nice shine that matches the rest of the armour. Back of the hand is done as well. Now, next up, I will be doing the head. I'll be working on the helmeted head. I will paint up the flesh one, I won't do a video on it, but just to see comparatively at the end. So that's what's next. Right, so I've done the blending on the head. Up next is the highlights with the Lawton blue, and then blending them in. Right, next up is the recess shading and then the edge highlights. Up next is the white, and then glazing over with Lawton blue and bring it back up to very fine white. This is the final stage, and we'll see how it looks afterwards. Right, so that is the helmeted head done for now. It's going to look a lot better once we fill in the rest of the details, but that's the blue done for it. Pretty happy with it. Might brighten up the top of the head later. But next up is the backpack, and then that'll be all the blue done. Fantastic. Right, so we've done almost all of the blue now. We've got the head done, we've got the arms, the legs, the chest. All that's left now is the backpack. So, as usual, I'm going to go through the stages we've already discussed, and we're going to start with the blocking in of Techless Blue. Right, that is the blending stage. Now time to block in the Northern Blue. Right, so that's the blending done and the Northern Blue done, or the blending for the Northern Blue done. Up next is the recess shading and edge highlights. Really simple, recess shade, then do the Techless Blue edge highlight and then the Northern Blue edge highlight, as I showed before. So I'm going to get on and do that now. Right, the Northern Blue has been, in fact, we're past that stage. I've edge highlighted and I've recess shaded the backpack. Next up is the primary highlights being picked up by thin down white and then glazed back over with Northern, and then only the highest details being picked up with a little bit of white again. And we should be finished by then. I'll show you how that looks all together. And here we are, the final outcome of the blue arm. Now, really happy with how this has turned out. It's a lot of fun to do. I I think it's going to look really, really good when it's all together on the base. So thank you for watching. Any questions, of course, send them to me and I'll answer them, help you out. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Cheers.